Hello, Maeve O'Boyle and Lucy Kennedy. Before we talk about your documentary, The Eighth, which examines abortion policy in Ireland, may you please tell me how Ireland has been dealing with COVID-19?
So I think Ireland has been doing a pretty good job so far. We closed the schools and the pubs and, generally shut things down at quite an early point. And the government has now put out a 5-phase plan to sort of reopen the country. So that's always a little contentious, but I think in general things have been dealt with well here.
All right, well that's fantastic. So, could you guys go ahead and pitch to my audience why they should check out your documentary, The Eighth?
Yeah, sure. Well, the eighth, our film, The Eighth, is about the Eighth Amendment, which is an amendment that is inserted into the Constitution in 1983, and it gives the unborn an equal right to life to that of its mother. Since it was inserted into the Constitution, there had been many, many tragic cases that happened as a result of the Eighth. And so I suppose Lucy, Aideen and I, growing up in Ireland under the shadow of the Eighth, we felt that this is an incredibly important story to tell for our generation. Also, go ahead, Lucy.
Yeah, no, I think in terms of why it's important at this moment in time is there are a lot of sort of pushbacks, especially in the United States, against abortion and reproductive rights, and Roe is very much under threat as well. So I think that this film shows the success over a long period of time of grassroots activism pushing against the what was a very, very rigid abortion law. As Maeve said, it equated the right to life of the woman with the child, or with the unborn, as it was called in the Constitution. So it seems, yeah.
I think that's right. And then in terms of the people that we followed, I think it's also really worthwhile just mentioning that, there were so many brilliant women who fought this for so long in Ireland. And, it was 35 years. And so we set our sights on Alva Smith, who is an incredible woman, activist, feminist, academic. And she's been really fighting for reproductive autonomy for decades in Ireland. And she also is incredibly engaging and just a wonderful person across the board. But we just felt that she was a perfect person to tell this story, because she's in her 70s. She has this incredible kind of vantage point where she's lived through and witnessed firsthand the transformation of Irish society, which is certainly what happened over the 35 years. And I think one other thing to mention as well is that, we created a series of kind of historical vignettes that also kind of, document the various tragic cases that happened in the course of the 35 years to try and connect you and kind of contextualize what it meant for Irish society to go through this period of time. There were many, many tragic cases that happened. And I think as a result, the movement was absolutely enormous in terms of young women as well, in their 20s and 30s. So, I mean, it's a very uplifting story for many people, I think. Would you agree, Lucy?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it's funny, on the day of the vote, when the results were announced, we were in Dublin Castle. And I think as the three of us, the three directors, were there, Aideen Kane as well, and we were all just so moved. It was a real moment of liberation. Yeah, so I think it's sort of it's a complex story. In a way, it's a story very specific to Ireland, but also that I think has resonance beyond Ireland as well.
Absolutely.
All right. So tell me about the role of religion in Ireland. And would you say there's always been a separation between church and state?
So, I mean, it's interesting you asked that question, because it's definitely something that is illustrated within the documentary. One of the things we aim to do is to sort of show the transformation of Ireland. So, there wasn't, since the 70s, there hasn't been an official sort of relationship between the church and state. But unofficially, since the foundation of the state in 1922, the church has been absolutely central to education, to schools, just to the social mores of society as a whole. And what our film does is that's started to crack in the last 20 years with the child abuse scandals, with Ireland becoming more affluent, more multicultural. So you see, I think, the movement of Ireland from a place that was really kind of very much dominated by the Catholic Church to a kind of more liberal secular society.
Okay, very interesting. Have pro-life voices in Ireland been hostile at all to you guys?
So it was really important to us to include the pro-life side because for a couple of reasons. It is a very nuanced subject, and I think people have beliefs that are deeply held and, can come from a very good place on all sides. It also is very representative. The pro-life side is very representative of where Ireland came from. So we approached the pro-life side and we got some access that you see in the film, but we didn't get the same access to embed in the campaign that we did with Together for Yes. So it hasn't yet screened in Ireland. So it'll be very interesting to see what kind of reaction we get from the pro-life side once it does.
All right. Can you tell me about support you have received for this documentary?
Well, yeah, sure. I think for most documentaries, fundraising is incredibly hard. It just is. But one of the things as well about this film was that there was a time frame. We had to have enough funds in place to be able to film the referendum. So we were very lucky in the early stage. Screen Ireland came on early on and gave us development money, and also Abigail Disney of Fork Films in New York also came in. And with those funds, we were able to document the referendum. And then once we had that in the can, so to speak, and we could kind of put together a sample or a trailer, I think things became a little easier because we had something to show. And I think this is often the way it works in documentary, until you have something to show, it's quite hard to raise funds. So at that point, we were lucky. And also because I guess it had been such a landslide victory and that, people could see the potential of the story, we then were lucky enough to have Open Society come on board, the Ford Foundation, Just Films. And then we did get equity funding from Screen Ireland and Archer Gray and Sabrina Mirage Foundation. So that got us over the line ultimately.
We made it. Yeah. Eventually.
It's a very stressful part of filmmaking, the fundraising, but I thought we were very lucky in that we got a lot of support in the end from a lot of brilliant organizations, a lot of women as well involved in these organizations, I will add, that supported us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Do you believe it's important to continue to fight for reproductive rights in Ireland?
Well, absolutely. I think that there is still a lot to fight for, As Alba says in the film, you don't win everything in one go. You don't win it all in one go. Essentially, the reality is that when the law was enacted in 2019, they put in place a 3-day mandatory waiting period. And I think there's been an awful lot of, contention over this. It means that a person who wants to have an abortion has to, go to the GP and then wait a mandatory 3 days and then, go back in order to get an abortion, essentially. And this is all within the 12 weeks, of course. I think that a lot of women feel that, it undermines their reproductive autonomy. But also, I think, women in rural areas, also disadvantaged, marginalized women of all kinds, victims of domestic abuse, asylum seekers and so on. It's very difficult for people to be able to go to the doctor twice in a 3-day period. It's expensive and so on and so forth. So I think that's something that people are really hoping will be removed. There is the law is going to be reviewed within 3 years. So I think it will be reviewed in early 2022. And I think that would be the hope. So that's one example of something that I think people would be pushing to change.
And one thing just to understand, I think that like for a Canadian audience where you have a very liberal abortion law, Ireland as Alva says in our film, like Ireland in January 2018 was a place where you couldn't even mention the word abortion. People, it was a very fraught issue. So I think the fact that we got to a point where abortion is available up to 12 weeks, even though, fighting needs to continue, does show what a transformation took place in Ireland. I mean, when the amendment was introduced in 1983 to the Constitution, it was introduced by a 2-to-1 majority. And when it was taken out of the Constitution 35 years later, it was taken out with a 2-to-1 majority. So that'll give you a sense of the change in the country over those years.
All right. So I would love for you guys to both tell me, maybe one each or maybe a couple more each, about other documentaries that really changed how you view the topic.
I think that, I remember seeing After Tiller, which is a film about late-term abortions, the 4 doctors in the United States who are still, doing late-term abortion procedures. And it's really stuck with me, that film, because of the ethics involved and how it was left up to the doctors. These 4 doctors, their mentor had been shot, Dr. Tiller. And I remember one of the doctors, I remember that this is probably a film that came out 7 years ago. And I still remember one of the doctors saying, why am I deciding who gets an abortion, a late-term abortion, and who doesn't? Why isn't that something that's sort of dealt with by the state or by the government? So it just was something that really, I suppose, raised a lot of questions for me, and it was very thought-provoking.
Yeah, no, I agree. Actually, it's an amazing film. For me, I was thinking of How to Survive a Plague by David France. I just absolutely love this film. It's an incredible story of a small kind of grassroots movement that just seized upon scientific research to develop drugs to put a stop to the AIDS epidemic. And I mean, I just think it was very moving to see such a small group of people making such incredibly massive change. It was very inspiring. And I also thought the material was amazing because they had so much incredible archival footage. So it was very alive and just incredibly inspiring all around. That would be one of my favorites more recently, I guess.
Well, I gotta check those out. I haven't seen either of those.
Okay.
Oh yeah, they're both well worth watching.
Absolutely.
Really good social issue docs.
Yes, that's right.
I look forward to it. So this is supposed to, you guys are supposed to come to Toronto to screen this, but obviously that's not going to happen. Have you guys ever been to Hot Docs before?
No, I have heard about Hot Docs and wanted to go to Hot Docs for years. I have friends in Toronto that I was looking forward to hanging out with, and so it's really exciting that the film is part of the festival. It would be great to be there in person, but sadly not this time.
Same for me. I haven't been to Hot Docs. A film that I edited, 112 Weddings, by Doug Block, was played up in Hot Docs, and unfortunately I wasn't able to go. So, but I mean, like Lucy, I've heard great things about Hot Docs. We were incredibly excited, of course, and hugely disappointed that we couldn't end up going. But maybe next time. I don't know.
Yeah, next time.
At least you guys are gracing the festival just in a little different kind of way. So, Maeve and Lucy, I want to thank you very much for your time. Before I let you go, could you please leave my audience with some pearls of wisdom with how to deal with being self-quarantined?
I wish I had some. I will say what I try and do to stay sane, which is try and keep a routine, and also try to be kind to myself and kind to those around me, because it really is just such a difficult, uncertain time.
I would agree with all of that. And also, for me, I found, and maybe this is negative on some level, but I found myself reading the news too much. I found myself kind of getting really down because I was just endlessly trying to catch up on what was going on and was there a vaccine and things like this. And I just decided to try and cut back a little on the news, so that I wouldn't be maybe as low, and start reading fiction a little more. And I also, one other little thing I felt has been useful is getting out of the house at least once a day, or wherever you live, get outside, breathe in the fresh air. It'll be over soon. I mean, as in, we don't know when it'll be over, but it will be over.
Exactly. I agree with the news consumption. You don't want to be ignorant, but you don't want to get super depressed either. Yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely.
A little middle path. All right, guys. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.